The moving truck was already half-loaded when I arrived. I sat in my car across the street, watching strangers carry my furniture out of the house I'd lived in for 32 years. The rocking chair where I'd nursed 3 babies. The dining room table where we'd celebrated every birthday, every holiday, every milestone that mattered. The china cabinet that had belonged to my mother, passed down through 3 generations of women who understood the value of things that last. My own granddaughter was directing the movers, clipboard in hand, pointing toward items like they were garage sale leftovers instead of pieces of my life. "Careful with that," I heard her call out as they maneuvered my mother's china cabinet through the front door. "It's probably worth something. Probably worth something." The irony wasn't lost on me. Everything in that house was worth something, not because of its monetary value but because of the memories embedded in every piece. The couch where Frank and I had watched our children take their first steps. The kitchen table where we'd made plans and paid bills and argued about money when there wasn't enough of it. The bedroom furniture we'd bought secondhand in 1985 and refinished together during long winter evenings. I was 61 years old, sitting in a 15-year-old Honda Civic with everything I was allowed to keep crammed into 2 suitcases in the back seat. The woman who had built a real estate empire from a single rental property, who had put 4 children through college, who had been the matriarch of a family that once respected the ground I walked on. Now I am homeless. The eviction notice was still folded in my purse, though I'd memorized every word. Failure to maintain property payments. Default on family loan agreements. Immediate vacation of premises required. All legal. All documented. All signed by the granddaughter I had raised when her own mother couldn't be bothered. Jessica emerged from the house carrying a small cardboard box, the only things she'd decided I was allowed to keep. She walked toward my car with the confident stride of someone who believed she was doing the right thing, someone who had convinced herself that destroying an old woman was actually mercy. "Grandma Rose," she said, tapping on my window. "I packed some of your personal items. Photos, jewelry, that sort of thing." I rolled down the window and looked at this 28-year-old stranger wearing my granddaughter's face. "Where am I supposed to go, Jessica?" She glanced away, uncomfortable but determined. "There's a nice senior community about 20 minutes from here." I looked into it. They have apartments, activities, and meal plans. You'll have people your own age to talk to. Activities. Meal plans. People my own age. Like I was a child who needed to be entertained and managed. "You'll be happier there," she continued, her voice taking on that patient tone people use with the elderly and infirm. "This house is too much for you to handle anyway. All the maintenance, the property management, the financial stress. It's not good for someone in your condition." My condition. I took the box from her hands and drove away without another word, watching in my rearview mirror as strangers continued to empty my life onto a truck. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. This story is already stirring something in your heart. I'd love to know, what time is it where you are right now and which city or state are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. Let's see how far this story is reaching. My name is Rose Hartwell and I am 61 years old. I know this because I count every year now, not in the way young people count toward milestones, but in the way that survivors count time. Each year is evidence that I'm still here, still breathing, still capable of more than anyone expects from a woman with silver hair and age spots on her hands. These hands have signed more real estate contracts than most agents see in a lifetime. They've painted countless rooms in countless rental properties, planted gardens that increased property values, and held the hands of 3 different children as they took their first steps. The wedding ring I still wear is thin now from 43 years of marriage to my late husband Frank, worn smooth by decades of love and partnership and shared dreams that we built together from nothing. I can close my eyes and still smell Frank's aftershave, Old Spice, the same brand he'd used since we were teenagers. I can still feel the roughness of his hands when he'd come home from construction sites covered in sawdust and pride, exhausted but eager to hear about my day, about the properties I'd looked at, about the deals I was negotiating. We met in 1978 when I was 18 and he was 21. Both of us working minimum wage jobs and dreaming of something bigger than the small apartment we shared above Murray's Bakery on Maple Street. The apartment that smelled like fresh bread every morning and had radiators that clanged all night in the winter. Where we learned to cook on a hot plate and where Frank proposed to me on New Year's Eve 1980, getting down on one knee in our tiny living room with a ring he'd saved 6 months to buy. Frank had vision. I had determination. Together we had everything we needed to build something that would last. Our first house was a disaster. A foreclosure in a neighborhood that real estate agents called up and coming, but everyone else called rough. We bought it for $12,000 with money we'd saved by eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner and walking everywhere instead of buying a second car. The house had broken windows, holes in the roof, and a basement that flooded every time it rained for more than an hour. I was so young then, I think now. So naive about what the world could take from you, about how the people you love most can become the ones who hurt you worst. We spent every weekend for 2 years renovating that house. Frank learned plumbing from library books, staying up late reading about pipe joints and water pressure while I practiced tiling techniques on pieces of cardboard spread across our kitchen table. When our first daughter Emma was born in 1980, we were still living with exposed beams and a bathroom door that won't close properly, but we were proud of what we were building. We were happy. Poor and exhausted and covered in paint most days, but happier than I've ever been since. The babies came quickly after that, Emma in 1980, then the twins Michael and Sarah in 1982, and finally our surprise baby Jessica in 1995, when I was 35 and thought my childbearing days were long behind me. Jessica, my late-in-life blessing who became my greatest heartbreak. By the time Jessica was born, Frank and I owned 6 rental properties and a small property management company we'd built from our kitchen table. We'd climbed out of poverty through sheer will and careful investment, reinvesting every profit into the next opportunity, sometimes living on beans and rice for weeks so we could make a down payment on a property we knew would appreciate. I remember holding newborn Jessica in the living room of our dream home, 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms and a kitchen big enough for all of us to cook together, and thinking that we'd finally made it. That this was what security looked like. The older children were already in school, Emma was 16 and thinking about college, the twins were 14 and busy with sports and friends. Jessica was our unexpected gift, our chance to enjoy parenthood without the financial stress that had marked the early years. I had no way of knowing then that security is just an illusion, that family can become strangers, that love can turn into calculation when money is involved. I had no way of knowing that the baby in my arms would one day become my destroyer. Jessica grew up differently than her siblings. Where Emma, Michael, and Sarah had chores, summer jobs, and clear expectations about earning their privileges, Jessica was indulged by parents who finally had enough money to say yes to everything. Dance lessons, writing lessons, expensive clothes, a car for her 16th birthday. We thought we were giving her advantages we hadn't been able to give the others. What we were actually giving her was a sense of entitlement that would eventually consume us both. She was smart, brilliant really. Graduated high school a year early, earned a full scholarship to Ohio State for business administration. Frank and I were so proud at her graduation, watching our baby girl walk across that stage in her cap and gown, knowing she had opportunities we'd never dreamed of at her age. After college, Jessica moved to San Francisco to work for a tech startup. She called every Sunday for the first year, full of stories about her job, her apartment, and her exciting new life in the city. She sent pictures of herself at company parties, on weekend trips to Napa Valley, at restaurants that charged $30 for what she called artisanal pasta. I should have wondered how she could afford that lifestyle on an entry-level salary. I should have asked more questions about the credit cards and student loans she mentioned so casually. But I was proud of her independence, her confidence, her ability to navigate a world that had seemed impossible when Frank and I were her age. When she called less frequently, I told myself she was busy building her career. When she stopped visiting for holidays, I convinced myself she was creating her own traditions. I was already making excuses for her long before I needed to. Frank died on a Tuesday morning in March, 3 years ago. Not dramatically, not tragically, just the quiet way good men often leave this world, in his sleep beside the woman he'd loved for 4 decades. I woke up to silence, to the absence of his breathing, to the terrible stillness that follows a life well lived. The funeral was everything Frank would have hated: too much crying, too many flowers, too much fuss. But our children needed the ritual, needed a way to say goodbye to the man who had taught them that integrity mattered more than wealth, that family came before everything else, that success meant building something that would outlast you. If only they had remembered those lessons. Jessica flew home for the funeral, staying a week to help with arrangements and paperwork. She was efficient, organized, helpful in all the ways that grief makes difficult. She coordinated with the funeral home, organized meals for the family, and handled the logistics that I was too devastated to manage. I was grateful for her help. I should have been terrified. In the weeks after the funeral, while I was still learning how to sleep alone in a bed that felt enormous without Frank's familiar weight beside me, our children began to circle. Not with comfort. With concern. "Mom," Emma said during one of her carefully scheduled visits, "we need to talk about your finances." Emma was 43 then, a successful accountant with 2 teenagers and a husband who measured worth in stock portfolios. She sat at my kitchen table with a folder full of papers and the kind of expression she usually reserved for clients who couldn't balance their checkbooks. "I'm managing just fine," I told her, which was true. Frank had been meticulous about our finances, and I'd been his partner in every decision for 40 years. I knew exactly what we owned, what it was worth, and how to maintain it. "But the property management company," Emma pressed. "That's a lot for one person to handle. All those tenants, maintenance issues, legal compliance. And this house, it's huge. Maybe it's time to think about downsizing." Downsizing. The word that adult children use when they want to manage their parents like assets instead of people. Michael, my son who had inherited Frank's height but none of his wisdom, nodded from across the table. "Mom, we're just worried about you. You're 61 years old. That's not exactly young anymore." 61 years old. Not exactly young anymore. As if reaching my 60s had somehow transformed me overnight from a competent businesswoman into a confused elderly woman who needed supervision. "This is my home," I said simply. "Your father and I built this life together. I'm not ready to give it up." But Sarah, always the most direct of my children, cut straight to what they were all thinking. "Mom, you're 61 years old. Dad handled all the business stuff. How do you even know if you're making money or losing it? How do you even know?" As if I'd spent 4 decades sitting in the corner knitting while Frank made all the decisions. As if I hadn't been the one who spotted half of our best investment opportunities, who managed tenant relationships, who kept the books organized enough for Emma to review every year at tax time. "I know," I said, "because I helped build it." But I could see in their faces that they didn't believe me. To them, I was just Mom, the woman who had packed their lunches and cheered at their soccer games, not the woman who had identified undervalued properties and negotiated purchase agreements. They saw me as Frank's widow, not his partner. They saw me as their mother, not as a person with her own accomplishments and capabilities. And that blindness was about to cost me everything. The real problem started when Jessica moved back home 2 months after the funeral. She called on a Thursday evening in May, her voice carefully controlled but tinged with what sounded like desperation. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to hear me out before you say anything." I was in my kitchen preparing dinner for one, a reality I was still adjusting to after 40 years of cooking for Frank. The silence in the house felt oppressive most evenings, so I welcomed the sound of my daughter's voice. "Of course, honey. What's wrong?" The startup folded. "Last month. I've been trying to find another job, but the market is terrible right now and I've got student loans, rent, credit card payments." Her voice broke slightly. "I'm 3 months behind on everything. I'm going to be evicted if I don't come up with money soon." My maternal instincts kicked in immediately. "How much do you need?" "It's not that simple. I need somewhere to stay while I figure this out. I know it's a lot to ask, especially so soon after Dad died, but I was hoping I could come home for a while. Just until I get back on my feet." Of course she could come home. This was her home and would always be her home. Frank and I had raised 4 children in this house and there was always room for family. "You don't even need to ask," I told her. "This is your home too. Come whenever you're ready." I thought I was helping my family. I thought I was providing comfort during a difficult time. I had no idea I was inviting my destroyer to move in with me. Jessica arrived 3 days later with what she said was everything she owned: 3 suitcases, a laptop, and a small box of personal items. She looked thin, tired, older than her 28 years. The confident young woman who had left for San Francisco with big dreams and bigger plans had been replaced by someone who seemed fragile, defeated. I wanted to fix it for her. I wanted to make everything better the way I had when she was small. She moved into her old bedroom, the one we'd redecorated when she was 16 and decided pink was juvenile. It still had her trophies from high school debate team, her graduation photos, posters of bands she'd loved as a teenager. Being back in that room seemed to comfort her, and slowly over the first few weeks, she began to seem more like herself. She was helpful around the house, cooking dinner when I worked late, handling grocery shopping, organizing Frank's papers and belongings when I couldn't bear to do it myself. She listened when I needed to talk about missing Frank, offered practical suggestions when I felt overwhelmed by the responsibilities of managing everything alone. I was grateful for her presence. I was grateful not to be alone with my grief. I was so grateful that I didn't notice what she was really doing. The first sign something was wrong came 6 weeks after she moved in. I was in my home office, reviewing rental income statements for the month, when I noticed a discrepancy in one of our properties. The duplex on Elm Street, one of our most reliable investments, was showing significantly lower income than it should have been. Our tenant, Mrs. Rodriguez, had been paying $1,200 a month religiously for 3 years. She was a retired teacher, quiet and respectful, who always paid on the first of the month and took excellent care of the property. But according to our deposit records, we'd only received $800 in May. I called Jessica from the kitchen where she was making lunch for both of us, something I'd come to appreciate during the long, lonely days. "Honey, can you help me understand something? I'm looking at the Elm Street property and the numbers don't make sense." She came into my office with a dish towel in her hands, looking over my shoulder at the computer screen with the patient expression of someone humoring an elderly relative. "What's wrong now, Grandma Rose?" When had she started calling me Grandma Rose instead of Mom? When had she started using that tone, like she was speaking to a confused child? I showed her the discrepancy. "Mrs. Rodriguez pays $1,200 a month, but we only deposited $800 in May. Did something change with the lease?" Jessica glanced at the papers with barely concealed irritation. "Mom, you're looking at the wrong column again. That $800 is after expenses, maintenance, repairs, property management fees." "What property management fees?" "We manage it ourselves. We've always managed it ourselves. We hired a service, remember? To handle some of the day-to-day stuff so you wouldn't have to worry about it while you're dealing with Dad's death." I stared at her. "I never hired a property management service." "I will remember that." Jessica's expression shifted to something I'd never seen before, condescending pity mixed with frustration, the look someone gives when they're dealing with a person they consider mentally diminished. "Mom, we talked about this. You signed the contract yourself. You've been getting confused about these things lately. It's normal, grief affects memory, concentration. I read an article about it." Confused. The word hit me like a physical blow. Frank had been many things, but confused was never one of them. And neither was I. I'd been managing properties and tracking income for decades. I knew the difference between gross and net income, between legitimate expenses and unexplained fees. "Show me the contract," I said. "It's in the files somewhere. I'll find it later." Jessica was already walking back toward the kitchen. "Don't worry about it, Mom. Everything's being handled properly." "Don't worry about it. Everything's being handled. By someone else. Someone who apparently thought I was too confused to understand my own business." That night I went through every file in Frank's office. Every folder, every contract, every agreement we'd signed in 40 years of business. Frank had been obsessively organized. Every document labeled, dated, filed in logical order. If there was a property management contract, it would be in the vendor agreements folder, right between the landscaping service and the roof repair company. It wasn't there. There was no property management contract. No agreement to pay anyone $400 a month to handle a duplex that required virtually no management. Mrs. Rodriguez was a model tenant who handled minor issues herself and called only for major problems. Someone was stealing $400 a month from me. And my own daughter was calling me confused when I noticed. When I confronted Jessica the next morning, she was ready for me. More than ready, she was prepared. "Mom, sit down. We need to have a serious talk." She had prepared a folder of documents, bank statements, medical articles printed from the internet, printouts from websites about age-related cognitive decline, and grief-induced memory loss. She spread them across the kitchen table like evidence in a trial. "I've been tracking some concerning patterns," she said, her voice gentle but firm, the tone a doctor might use when delivering bad news. "Forgotten appointments, repeated questions, confusion about finances. I think you need to see a doctor." I looked at the papers she'd arranged so carefully. Bank statements that showed withdrawals I didn't remember making. A calendar with appointments I'd apparently missed. Notes in handwriting that looked like mine but felt foreign. Had I really forgotten these things? Was I actually losing my mind? Look at this, Jessica said, pointing to entries on a bank statement. 3 different appointments with Dr. Martinez that you missed. The receptionist called twice to confirm and you told her you'd be there, but you never showed up. I tried to remember. The weeks after Frank's death had been a blur of paperwork, phone calls, arrangements. Had I missed appointments? It was possible. Grief had a way of making everything feel underwater, distant and unclear. And here, she continued, showing me a notebook I recognized as my own. You wrote the same grocery list 3 times in one day. The same items in the same order, like you forgot you'd already written it. I had written those lists, but I didn't remember writing them multiple times. The stress of Dad's death, living alone in this big house, trying to manage the business by yourself. It's too much, Jessica continued. Dr. Martinez has an opening next week. I already made you an appointment. Dr. Martinez, the family physician who'd been taking care of us for 20 years. Who would certainly find it concerning if Frank Hartwell's widow was showing signs of dementia. Jessica was building a case against me, and she was using my own confusion and grief to do it. I don't need a doctor, I said, but my voice sounded uncertain even to myself. Mom, this is serious. What if you forget to turn off the stove? What if you get lost driving somewhere? What if you make a financial mistake that costs us everything Dad worked for? Everything Dad worked for. As if I hadn't worked for it too. As if I hadn't been an equal partner in building our life together. But the doubt was creeping in. The terrible possibility that maybe I really was losing my ability to function, that maybe the confusion I felt was more than grief, that maybe my own daughter was trying to protect me from myself. Maybe I really couldn't be trusted anymore. The second major incident happened 3 weeks later, and it shattered any remaining confidence I had in my own perceptions. I was having coffee with my neighbor Dorothy Walsh on her back porch. Dorothy was 73, sharp as a tack, and had been our neighbor for 15 years. If anyone would tell me the truth about my mental state, it would be Dorothy. I'm so glad Jessica found such responsible tenants for the Johnson property, Dorothy said casually, stirring sugar into her coffee. That young couple seems lovely. Very quiet, very neat. Much better than those college students who were renting it before. I set down my coffee cup carefully, trying to process what she'd said. What young couple? The ones who moved into your rental house on Oak Street. The Johnson property. Jessica said you'd decided to rent it to them instead of selling it. The Johnson property had been empty for 6 months. We'd been planning to sell it. I'd never authorized anyone to rent it. Dorothy, I said slowly, what exactly did Jessica tell you? Just that you'd changed your mind about selling, that she was handling the rental for you since you've been having some difficulties since Frank passed. Difficulties. There was that word again. The careful, polite way people described someone who was losing their grip on reality. When did this happen? When did they move in? Dorothy looked at me with concern. About a month ago, dear. Don't you remember? Jessica mentioned that you were letting her handle more of the business affairs while you focus on your health. A month ago. Someone had been living in my property for a month and I'd never been told. I drove straight to Oak Street, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. There was indeed a young couple living in the house. Their car was in the driveway, children's toys scattered across the front yard, curtains in the windows. They'd made it into a home, complete with a small garden and a welcome mat at the front door. A home that I owned but knew nothing about. I sat in my car across the street for nearly an hour, trying to process what I was seeing. Someone was living in my property, paying rent to someone, and I'd never been told about any of it. Where was that rent money going? And what else didn't I know about my own business? When I got home, Jessica was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Pot roast, my favorite, the same recipe I'd taught her when she was 12 years old. How was your visit with Dorothy? She asked without looking up from the stove. She mentioned the Johnson property. That we have new tenants. Jessica's hands stilled for just a moment, then resumed stirring the gravy. Oh, that. I meant to tell you, but you've been so stressed lately, I didn't want to add to your worries. You didn't want to add to my worries by telling me about rental income? Mom, sit down. Let me explain. She turned off the burner and guided me to a chair at the kitchen table, her hands gentle on my shoulders. The concern in her face looked genuine, loving, the expression of a daughter worried about her mother's well-being. You've been forgetting things, she said softly. Important things. Last week, You told me 3 different times that you needed to call the insurance company about Dad's policy. You kept asking if I'd heard from the lawyer about the will. You couldn't remember having conversations we'd had the day before. Had I repeated myself? Had I forgotten conversations? The grief had been so overwhelming that most days blended together. It was entirely possible that I'd been more confused than I realized. So I've been handling some of the business details, Jessica continued. Things that don't require your immediate attention. The Johnson property needed new tenants, so I found some. They're paying market rate, excellent references, no problems. But I should have been told. You should have been, and I'm sorry about that. But Mom, you need to understand, I'm trying to protect you. The stress of managing everything by yourself isn't good for you. It's affecting your memory, your judgment. My judgment. The foundation of everything I'd built with Frank. My ability to assess properties, evaluate tenants, make sound financial decisions, was apparently compromised. Maybe, Jessica said gently, it's time to let me help more officially. I could take over the day-to-day operations while you focus on taking care of yourself. Take over the day-to-day operations. While I focused on taking care of myself. Like an invalid. Like someone who could no longer be trusted with adult responsibilities. That evening I called Emma. Honey, I said, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me. Have you noticed me being confused lately? Forgetful. There was a long pause. When Emma spoke again, her voice was careful, measured. Mom, Jessica mentioned that you've been having some difficulties adjusting to life without Dad. She said you've been repeating questions, forgetting appointments. Jessica had been talking to my other children about my supposed mental decline. She said you accused her of stealing money from you, which is obviously... Emma trailed off as if she couldn't bring herself to say the word. Obviously crazy. Obviously the paranoid delusion of a grief-stricken old woman. Emma, what if I told you that I found money missing from our accounts? That Jessica has been making decisions about the business without telling me. Another pause. Longer this time. Mom, that's exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that concerns us. Jessica isn't stealing from you. She's trying to help you. She's trying to protect the business that you and Dad built. Paranoid thinking. Even my own children thought I was losing my mind. The third major incident happened 2 weeks later, when I tried to access our primary business bank account and found that my access had been revoked. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hartwell, the bank teller said, looking uncomfortable as she stared at her computer screen. Your account access was removed at the request of your power of attorney. Power of attorney. I felt the floor disappear beneath my feet. I never gave anyone power of attorney. The teller consulted her computer screen again, clearly wishing she was anywhere else. According to our records, you executed a durable power of attorney in favor of Jessica Hartwell 6 months ago. She's been managing all your financial affairs since then. 6 months ago. Before Frank died. That was impossible. I need to speak with a manager, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The manager was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and the carefully professional manner of someone who dealt with elderly customers having financial difficulties. Mrs. Hartwell, I understand this is confusing. Let me pull up your file and we can review everything together. She led me to her office and spent 20 minutes showing me documents on her computer screen. The power of attorney was legitimate, properly notarized with my signature clearly visible at the bottom. But I had no memory of signing it. This is dated 6 months ago, I said. My husband was still alive then. Why would I have signed a power of attorney? The manager's expression was sympathetic but firm. According to the documentation your daughter provided, you were beginning to experience some cognitive difficulties. The power of attorney was established as a precautionary measure. Cognitive difficulties. 6 months ago. Before I'd even begun to grieve. Jessica had been planning this since before Frank died. I want to revoke it, I said. I want to regain control of my own accounts. I understand, Mrs. Hartwell. But revoking a power of attorney requires a legal process, especially when there are questions about mental competency. You'd need to petition the court, probably with the assistance of an attorney. Questions about mental competency. She was saying as politely as possible that they didn't believe I was capable of managing my own affairs. When I got home, Jessica was waiting for me in the living room. She'd clearly been expecting this conversation. Mom, the bank called. They said you were upset about the power of attorney. I don't remember signing it, Jessica. We talked about it for weeks. You were worried about what would happen if you got sick or confused. You wanted to make sure someone responsible could handle things if necessary. She pulled out another folder. This one filled with documents I'd apparently signed, conversations we'd apparently had, decisions I'd apparently made. All of which I had no memory of. Look, she said, showing me a legal document with my signature at the bottom. You even insisted on having it notarized by Mr. Patterson from down the street. You said you wanted to make sure it was completely legal. Mr. Patterson. Our neighbor who was a retired notary. Who would certainly remember notarizing such an important document. But I had no memory of any of it. Was my mind really so far gone that I could forget something so significant? The doctor's appointment is Friday, Jessica said gently. I think we need to consider some more serious options. Maybe a care facility where you can get the help you need. A care facility. She was planning to have me institutionalized. I'm not going to a care facility, I said. Mom, you're scaring me. You don't remember signing important legal documents. You're accusing me of stealing from you when I'm trying to help you. These aren't normal grief reactions anymore. These aren't normal grief reactions. This is a mental illness. This is dementia. This is the end of my independence, my dignity, my life as I've known it. That night, I lay awake in the bed I'd shared with Frank for 30 years and tried to understand how my life had gone so completely wrong. 3 years ago, I'd been a successful businesswoman with a loving family and a secure future. Now I was apparently a confused old woman who couldn't be trusted to manage her own affairs. Either I really was losing my mind or my own daughter was destroying me so systematically that I couldn't tell the difference. And I was beginning to suspect it was the latter. The appointment with Dr. Martinez was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Friday morning in October. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the world in shades of gold and amber that reminded me of happier autumns, of times when October meant pumpkin patches with grandchildren and cozy evenings planning for the holidays. Now it felt like I was driving to my own execution. Jessica drove me in my own car. The car that was apparently now hers to control since I was too confused to be trusted behind the wheel. She chatted pleasantly about the weather, her job search, the nice lunch we'd have afterward, as if we were heading to a routine checkup instead of an evaluation that would determine whether I retained any control over my own life. I felt like a prisoner being transported to trial. Except the verdict had already been decided. Dr. Martinez had been our family physician for 20 years. He'd delivered Jessica, guided us through Frank's high blood pressure and eventual heart problems, held my hand while I signed Frank's death certificate. His office smelled the same as it always had, antiseptic mixed with the faint scent of coffee from the break room. The same magazines were scattered across the waiting room table, the same pastoral paintings hung on the walls. Everything was exactly the same except I was no longer the person I'd been the last time I sat in this chair. Or maybe I was exactly the same and everyone else had decided I was someone different. We were called back after a 15-minute wait. Dr. Martinez greeted me with the same warm smile he'd always used, but there was something different in his eyes. Something that looked suspiciously like pity. Rose, he said, settling behind his desk with a file that seemed unusually thick. Jessica tells me you've been having some difficulties since Frank passed. Memory issues, confusion about finances, some episodes of disorientation. Episodes of disorientation. Like I was having medical events instead of normal grief reactions. Doctor, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I think there's been a misunderstanding. But Jessica was ready. She'd been preparing for this appointment for months, building her case piece by piece, gathering evidence of my supposed decline with the methodical precision of a prosecutor. She's forgotten multiple appointments, Jessica said, opening her folder with documents arranged in perfect order. She's made accusations about money being stolen when I've been helping her manage her finances. She doesn't remember signing important documents, including a power of attorney that we discussed extensively. Dr. Martinez looked at the papers Jessica presented, copies of missed appointment cards, bank statements with highlighted discrepancies, the power of attorney document with my signature at the bottom. Evidence of my incompetence, my confusion, my unfitness to manage my own life. Rose, do you remember our last appointment? When we discussed adjusting your blood pressure medication. I tried to think. There had been so many appointments after Frank died, so much paperwork, so many changes to navigate. The grief had been overwhelming, making every day feel like I was moving through thick fog. But was that grief or was it something more serious? I started then stopped. The truth was I couldn't remember that specific appointment. There had been so many medical visits in the months following Frank's death. For myself to handle his affairs, to deal with the endless bureaucracy of death. Maybe I really was more confused than I realized. Maybe Jessica was right to be concerned. Maybe I really couldn't be trusted anymore. Doctor, Jessica said, her voice full of what sounded like genuine worry, I'm scared about her living alone. She's gotten lost driving to places she's been going for years. She's left the stove on overnight. Yesterday she accused me of stealing from her when I was just helping her pay bills. I had never gotten lost driving. I had never left the stove on. But how could I prove a negative? How could I prove something hadn't happened when my own memory felt unreliable? Dr. Martinez turned to me with the kind of gentle, professional concern that made my stomach clench with dread. Rose, how are you feeling emotionally? Are you experiencing depression, anxiety, feelings of being persecuted or misunderstood? Feelings of being persecuted. Because I was being persecuted. But how could I say that without sounding exactly like the paranoid old woman Jessica was describing? I feel like my own family doesn't believe me, I said quietly. I feel like I'm losing control of my own life, and no one will listen when I try to explain what's really happening. Mom, Jessica said, reaching over to pat my hand with what looked like genuine affection. We believe you're hurting. We believe you're struggling. That's why we want to help. As if she spoke for the entire family. As if everyone had already decided my fate. Dr. Martinez spent the next 40 minutes putting me through a series of tests and questions. What year was it? Who was the president? Could I count backwards from 100 by sevens? Simple cognitive assessments that I passed easily, but I could see in his face that he wasn't testing my ability to think clearly. He was testing whether I was competent to make my own decisions. And Jessica's months of careful preparation were working. Rose, he said finally, his voice taking on the tone doctors use when they're about to deliver unwelcome news. I think we should discuss some options for additional support. Jessica mentioned looking into assisted living facilities, which might provide you with more structure and supervision. Assisted living facilities. Structure and supervision. Like I was a child who couldn't be trusted to take care of herself. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. This isn't about my mental health, doctor. This is about my daughter systematically taking control of my life and my finances. The silence in the room was deafening. Dr. Martinez and Jessica exchanged a look. The kind of look that passes between professionals dealing with a difficult, delusional patient. They had already decided. Before I even walked into this office, they had already decided that I was incompetent. That I was a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. I want a second opinion, I said. I want to see a different doctor. I want someone else to evaluate me. Of course, Dr. Martinez said smoothly. That's entirely your right. But in the meantime, given my concerns about your safety and well-being, I think it would be prudent if Jessica continued to handle your financial affairs. Continued to handle my financial affairs. As if it was already settled. As if I was already gone. Jessica drove me home in silence, her face composed and satisfied. She'd gotten exactly what she wanted. Official medical documentation that I was unstable, unreliable, in need of management. The radio played softly in the background, some cheerful pop song that felt obscene in the context of what had just happened. She'd turned my own grief against me. She'd used my love for her as a weapon to destroy me. And she'd done it so skillfully that even I had begun to doubt myself. That evening, while Jessica made phone calls to care facilities, and spoke in hushed tones about intake processes and memory care units, I sat alone in my kitchen and realized that I had a choice to make. I could accept this. I could let them put me somewhere safe and comfortable where I would be fed and medicated and slowly forgotten. I could disappear gracefully, the way society expects elderly women to disappear when they become inconvenient. Or I could fight back. Even if everyone thought I was crazy. Even if I had to do it completely alone. I was 61 years old, not 91. I had built a business from nothing once before. I had survived poverty, loss, betrayal, and now I was facing the ultimate betrayal, from my own child. But I was not finished yet. And I was about to prove it. The first thing I did was disappear. Not literally. I'm not a character in a movie, and at 61 my options for dramatic exits were limited. But I stopped fighting Jessica's narrative. I stopped protesting when she made decisions about my life. I stopped correcting her when she told people I was confused. I let everyone believe I had given up. I let them think they had won. While Jessica was busy arranging my exile to Spring Meadows Senior Living Community, a place with cheerful names for sad realities, I was quietly gathering evidence of everything she'd done. The storage unit I rented under my maiden name, Rose Patterson, in a facility across town where Jessica would never think to look. The copies of every document, every financial statement, every fake contract Jessica had created over the past year. I photographed bank statements, rental agreements, the power of attorney document that I now remembered signing, but under completely different circumstances than Jessica had described. I had signed it, but only after Jessica had presented it as a routine update to our estate planning, something recommended by our lawyer after Frank's death. She had lied about the purpose, the scope, the implications of what I was signing. And she had been so confident in her manipulation that she hadn't bothered to hide the evidence of her theft. I also hired a lawyer. Not the family attorney who'd known us for decades and might be swayed by Jessica's careful presentation of my supposed incompetence, but a young woman named Sarah Chin who specialized in financial elder abuse. I found her through an internet search at the public library, where I went every day under the pretense of attending senior activities, while actually researching my legal options. "Mrs. Hartwell," Sarah said after reviewing the evidence I'd gathered, "this is one of the most systematic cases of financial manipulation I've ever seen. Your daughter has been planning this for at least 2 years, possibly longer. 2 years. Since before Frank died. Since before I had any reason to think I needed protection from my own child. She started small," Sarah continued, "testing your boundaries, seeing what she could get away with. Then she escalated gradually, always with plausible explanations, always positioning herself as your helper and protector. Can we prove it in court?" Sarah smiled. The sharp, satisfied smile of someone who enjoyed destroying predators who targeted vulnerable people. "Oh, we can do more than prove it. We can get everything back, we can make sure she faces criminal charges, and we can establish your competence so clearly that no one will ever question your ability to manage your own affairs again. But first I had to survive the commitment hearing. Jessica had petitioned the court to have me declared mentally incompetent, using Dr. Martinez's evaluation and her carefully documented evidence of my decline. If she succeeded, I would lose all legal control over my life and property. Everything would become hers, permanently and legally. She would have succeeded in stealing not just my money but my identity, my independence, my dignity. The hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in November. Jessica had arranged for me to be represented by a court-appointed guardian ad litem, essentially a lawyer whose job was to determine what was best for me, rather than what I actually wanted. She thought she'd covered every angle. She thought she'd anticipated every possible resistance. She hadn't counted on me hiring my own representation. She hadn't counted on me being smart enough, strong enough, angry enough to fight back. When Sarah Chin walked into that courtroom, Jessica's face went completely white. For the first time since this nightmare began, my daughter looked genuinely surprised, genuinely afraid. She'd underestimated me. They all had. "Your Honor," Sarah said, "I'm representing Mrs. Rose Hartwell, who is not only mentally competent but has been the victim of systematic financial abuse by her own daughter." What followed was 3 hours of Jessica's carefully constructed lies being demolished piece by piece. The forged rental agreements that showed properties being managed by companies that didn't exist. The unauthorized power of attorney that had been obtained through misrepresentation and fraud. The fake medical appointments and manufactured confusion. The money that had been systematically stolen over 18 months and deposited into accounts Jessica had opened without my knowledge. Bank accounts in Jessica's name that contained over $60,000 of my money. Money she'd been stealing while telling everyone she was protecting me. "Your Honor," Sarah said, "this is not a case of an elderly woman needing protection from her own poor judgment. This is a case of a young woman systematically destroying her mother's life in order to steal her assets." Jessica tried to maintain her performance. The concerned daughter, the loving caregiver, the victim of her mother's paranoid accusations. But when faced with actual evidence, with documented proof of her theft and manipulation, her mask finally slipped. She's old. Jessica screamed when the judge questioned her about the unauthorized financial transactions. She doesn't understand business anymore. She can't take care of herself. I was protecting her. There was the truth she'd been hiding behind months of fake concern. He thought I was too old to fight back. He thought I was too weak to matter. She thought she could take everything from me and I would just disappear quietly. He was wrong. The judge's ruling was swift and complete. Not only was I declared fully competent, but Jessica was ordered to return every penny she'd stolen, forfeit any claim to my properties, and face criminal prosecution for elder abuse and fraud. But getting my money back was just the beginning. What I did next surprised everyone, including myself. Instead of simply reclaiming my old life, I used Jessica's betrayal as fuel to build something bigger. I sold the house that held too many painful memories and invested the proceeds in a new venture. A real estate investment company that specialized in helping other seniors protect and grow their assets. I called it Second Chapter Holdings, because I was tired of people assuming that being over 60 meant your productive years were over. Because I wanted to prove that sometimes the best chapters of your life happen after everyone expects you to stop writing. Within 6 months, I had acquired 12 properties and partnered with 3 other women who'd survived their own financial abuse. Margaret, whose son had stolen her retirement savings. Elena, whose nephew had convinced her to sign over her house, temporarily, and then refused to give it back. Dorothy, my neighbor who had watched my own nightmare unfold, whose daughter-in-law had been slowly draining her accounts for years. We were all women over 60 who'd been told we were too old, too trusting, too confused to manage our own lives. And we were about to prove that assumption devastatingly wrong. Within a year, Second Chapter Holdings was managing over 50 units and had expanded into property management services for other elderly investors. We offered something no other company in our area provided: real estate investment opportunities managed by people who understood what it meant to have your competence questioned, your autonomy threatened, your life's work dismissed as confusion. We knew what it felt like to be underestimated. And we used that knowledge to build something extraordinary. The business grew faster than I'd ever imagined possible. Turns out there are a lot of older women who've been told they should simplify their finances, who've been pushed aside by children who think inheritance should come early, who've been patronized by financial advisors who think gray hair means gullibility. We gave them an alternative. We gave them respect, expertise, and the chance to grow their wealth instead of just preserving it. By my 63rd birthday, Second Chapter Holdings was valued at over $2 million. I owned properties in 3 states, employed 15 people, and had been featured in Forbes as an example of late-in-life entrepreneurship. The article called me a silver tsunami success story, and quoted financial experts who said my model was revolutionary in its approach to senior investing. The woman they'd tried to have declared incompetent was now a millionaire. The grandmother they'd planned to warehouse in a care facility was now the CEO of her own company. The mother whose own daughter had stolen from her was now helping other families prevent the same betrayal. Jessica served 18 months in prison for elder abuse and fraud. She was released last spring and moved to another state. We have no contact and I prefer it that way. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive. Some relationships are too damaged to repair. And sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved is to let them stay broken. My other children took longer to understand what had really happened, but they eventually came around. Emma now handles our legal compliance and Michael oversees property maintenance. They work for me, not with me, a distinction that keeps our relationships clear and our boundaries firm. I learned that love without respect is worthless. I learned that a family who will betray you once will do it again if given the chance. And I learned that sometimes the people who try to destroy you give you the greatest gift of all: the motivation to become more than you ever thought possible. These days I live in a beautiful condo overlooking Lake Erie, wake up every morning to a business that challenges and excites me, and go to sleep every night knowing that I am exactly where I belong. Not because someone else decided what was best for me. Because I fought for the right to decide for myself. Because I refused to disappear when the world expected me to fade away. 3 years ago I was sitting in a car watching strangers move my furniture out of the house I'd called home for 32 years. I was homeless, powerless, and convinced that my life was effectively over. I was wrong about that last part. I was so very beautifully wrong. Today I'm the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. I employ people who respect my experience and value my judgment. I mentor other women who've been told they're too old, too emotional, too confused to manage their own lives. And every single day I prove that 60-something is not a death sentence. It's a launching pad. The people who tried to destroy me gave me the greatest gift imaginable. They showed me exactly how strong I really was. They pushed me so far down that the only direction left was up. And sometimes, up is exactly where you discover you were meant to be all along. If you're watching this and you're facing your own Jessica, your own family member who thinks you're too old to matter, too weak to fight back, too trusting to see what they're really doing, please know this. You're not too old. You're not too weak. You are not finished. You're just getting started. The world wants to convince women like us that our useful years end when our children leave home, when our husbands die, when our hair turns gray. They want us to step aside gracefully, to stop taking up space, to stop believing we deserve more than basic survival. They're wrong. We're wrong when we believe them. And we're magnificent when we prove them wrong. Your experience is not a liability, it's an asset. Your age is not a weakness, it's wisdom. Your scars are not evidence of failure. They're proof that you've survived everything life has thrown at you and you're still here. Still fighting. Still building. Still becoming. The best revenge against people who underestimate you isn't anger or bitterness or even forgiveness. Its success is so complete, so undeniable, so spectacular that they have no choice but to acknowledge what they tried to destroy. It's becoming so much more than they ever thought possible that their betrayal becomes the foundation of your triumph. It's living so well that their attempt to diminish you becomes the very thing that elevates you. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking this road with me. I hope this story gave you strength, or at least the feeling that you're not alone. Comment where you're watching from and maybe subscribe. Let's build a place where voices like mine, and maybe even yours, are finally heard.